Hi, Dmytro. Hi, everyone who is watching us on YouTube. This is my second stream, and I want to welcome my friend and tech entrepreneur, Dmytro Pleshakov. Hi, Dmytro.
Hi, Sergey. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for accepting my invitation to participate in this conversation. We're streaming live on YouTube, and I decided to make this series of streams with my friends, colleagues, and just people who do great stuff all over the world, for them to be able to share the thoughts and details on the projects they are working on. So let's start. Dmytro, I suggested to start from the very beginning. Let's start from childhood and the school. Where were you born? Where did you go to school?
Yeah, again, thanks for having me here. And yeah, let's start with the very beginning. Maybe just a quick line of who am I, so people are interested in my childhood, because I go into these small details and they're like, who the fuck is this guy here? Yeah, so just a few words about myself. I'm a tech entrepreneur. I've been doing startups in the field of AI and machine learning for the past 10 years. And my biggest company to date was called Captain Growth. It was the software to automate media buying for ads. And the company was acquired by a public company from Israel. So technically, I'm an entrepreneur with an exit behind me. Now I'm about to start a new venture, also in the AI field, and we'll talk about that, I think, later on in the program.
Okay, now your childhood is interesting.
Yeah, and now all the way to the childhood, exactly. Yeah, so I studied in Kiev. I was born not in Kiev, actually. I was born in Lugansk. It was a random event because my dad, back then he was a military pilot, and in Lugansk there was a big base of the Ukrainian fighter jets. So that's how I found myself there. But when I was 3, the family moved back to Kiev.
So you remember almost nothing about Lugansk, right?
Yeah, remember nothing about Lugansk, but all my documents, they have Lugansk there printed. So now, like, after Lugansk became a dangerous place and after all these things happened with Lugansk, I keep being asked, like, are you really connected to that place or not? In reality, not, but it has some like trace in my background. Yeah, so then we moved to Kiev, and all my like childhood and most of my life I spent there. So that's like my hometown.
Where did you go to school? I mean, district or number of the school?
Yeah, it's the one in the center of Kiev. It's in between Gogolevska Street, if you know the place, and not far from this big square of Victory, or Peremogi Square. It's called Lyceum number 38. Not the most eloquent name, but actually it was a good school with the strongest part was mathematics there, mathematics and informatics. So they taught us programming from the pretty early days, I think from the 5th form. And other than that, nothing special. So just the school, a bit more of mathematics than normally.
What was that? Basic, Pascal?
Yeah, we started with some, I think it was Pascal initially, and then we moved to a language called Delphi. Yeah, it's a pretty old school thing. I've heard, like, my brother is now studying there, and I've heard that now they're using Python, and which is much more up to date and much more modern. Back in my days, we were like, it was totally irrelevant, but still you were able to catch some concepts at least.
Okay, so why journalism? I know that you graduated from the Institute of Journalism. How did it happen that you switched from math and programming and everything to journalism?
Yeah, that's a great question. I also sometimes ask it myself. I had these two streams, like actually always, they were competing sort of for my attention and for my focus. So one, I liked all these things about structure and analytics and programming and, you know, something accurate and structurable. On the other hand, I started to hear myself. Oh, it's okay now. Yeah, and on the other hand, I loved actually doing creative writing. Like I loved literature, arts, reading, and also doing the creative writing. And so that second part of myself, at some point it won. And when I was maybe at my 15, 16, I decided, well, writing matters more to me than calculating and crunching numbers. Why shouldn't I go and dedicate my life to that. And journalism was the reasonable way to go in this context. And so I entered the university for that profile, and then I graduated it and met a lot of great people, and that's how eventually I met you. So maybe it was a good decision for that sake. But because of this decision, I had to give up on all this mathematics and all the science and everything for quite some time, because it was a totally different path. And then eventually...
during the 5 years at the university, you were not doing any math or science or anything related to that, right?
Yeah. So it was the classical journalism. It was an interesting period for journalism and for media in general. I think it was 2011. So it was the early days of Facebook, especially like in Yukon, Ukrainian territory. And social media were just were still a new phenomena, and digital marketing was still a new phenomena, and everyone was starting to understand and what is that, how it works, what's the opportunity there, how should we transform. It was like the beginning of this era, and in front of our eyes, this era actually started to happen, and we saw pretty much the death of traditional media, or at least this huge decline of traditional media in favor of new media. And so it was a pretty, I think, exciting period to be there in the industry, because there was a huge tectonic movement. I think it can be compared to the period when the printed press arose. It's a huge change. And so you're in the middle of this change. You are still a teenager. You don't understand much, but you see things are really moving.
So you studied journalism and see everything moving. It's like, hey, I need to go there. Something like that.
Yeah. And you see that no one really understands. So you think, okay, maybe I need to find something stable in this life, right? I want something to grab it, and it's still there, but everything is moving. So there is no stable part. And even people who you admire and who you think are great in the industry, they tell you, we're not sure this profession will even exist in 5 years, because it's such a huge turbulence here. And so you find yourself here in the middle of this process, and you need to actually think for yourself, what should you do? Where is your place? Because, okay, you can go for the more classical approach, right? Like a classical employee approach. You just apply for a job and don't care and let others decide, right? So let the flow take me somewhere. But I was never this type of person. I was always interested to understand exactly what's going on, right? And to be conscious about what I'm doing.
Did you have any area of specialization, like TV journalism or printed media?
I tried a few, and I stopped at printed, because printed was reflecting the most my motivation to enter, because it was about writing actual texts, and that's what I loved. There was no ChatGPT around back then, so writing text seemed to be a good skill. Surprisingly, yeah. for modern generation, it will sound like, what? Writing text. But back then it was sounded to me like a good skill. So yeah, that was my formal specialization. Though pretty early on, me and my friends, we founded on online media, and we understood that of course everything goes to online, and still online you can write texts, and it's still about writing, but in a different format. So pretty early on, we founded this media, and that's how my entrepreneurship started. Okay, we wanted to write. We didn't know where can we write the way we like it. There was no media in Ukraine back then that had, I don't know, the attitude, the style, the approach that we would appreciate. So we decided, why not to try to start our own? And we tried, and we failed. I think mostly because we were we had good sides of this initiative, because we were very young, very ambitious, and very sky's the only limit, so no barriers.
How old were you?
18, I think, 18 years old. Yeah, so this, when you have a lot of energy and when you have a lot of ambition, that's a good thing. But the bad thing that you have zero experience, and sometimes that stops great things from being successful. And that was exactly our case, because it's not just about being able to write text, it's also about being able to form a team, found a company, be able to earn money or get investors on board. And that's where we actually sucked back then.
What was the next step?
Yeah, the next step was actually to try to learn how to do the business, right? So, okay, writing is nice, but maybe you should be able to do the actual business. And actual business means you have clients, they pay you for something and generate some kind of value. What would that be, right? And media is not the simplest business to run, even these days. Many smart guys struggle with making the business model work. In many cases, it's cash negative ventures. So media was not the most reasonable choice. And even back then we understood that. So after this first failure, we understood, well, to start with media is not the simplest, not the most reasonable move. So we went to the adjacent area, which is advertising. It's like, in a way, it's similar. It's still media, you work with them, but from the other side. But in this case, you understand how to earn money, right? There is a clear business model behind it. You sell something, you're paid for your services, and that makes sense. And advertising was similar, was going through similar times as journalism. This huge transformation, like decline of the traditional ads on TV and especially in print, and the rise of this digital marketing. So we went into this digital marketing field. It was pretty common back then. Many new digital agencies arose. A lot of young people founded them because here young people had this competitive advantage over the dinosaurs of the industry. They understood new media, right? So you say, okay, there's Facebook out there and we know how Facebook works, or there's Instagram, we know how it works. It's still the case, like TikTok appears and there's a bunch of TikTok agencies who hire young guys because, every generation brings new media and new agencies to serve that media. It's like
you bring more details to what the startup was actually doing.
Yeah, I would not call that even a startup because not every young company can be called a startup. I think like startup has some specifics, right? It should be a technology company normally, and it should have this ambition to grow vastly. That was a typical small business, right? Digital advertising agency. So you find clients, you sell them services. The service is either in digital marketing field, there are a few typical services. First is digital ads or online ads. So you help them actually market their products, promote them in online media, through advertising, maybe through PR. Sometimes you build them websites or their company pages, or you define this content strategy, things like that. So basically there is online space and you work on their presence in that space, whatever that means. Have many tracks. And we tried different tracks, and generally there are two main profiles of these companies. First was more on the creative side. So if you're a creative agency, you are more on the content and how could you look like. And the other is more on the data side. It's like, okay, we are more like an analytical company and we help you actually get the numbers in place, right? You're a company you want to sell, you want to earn, and we help you optimize that process. And that was a big actually distinction between the two. And at some point, every company has to decide on which side do you stand. If you're a creative, different type of people you hire, different service, different pricing. And at some point we actually, and I think that has to do with my mathematics background back to school and this love about structure and analytics, we decided to go on that path of data-driven company, not a creative company. And I think that was a great move because it actually allowed us to enter a much more interesting game than advertising itself, which is like a technology game.
So now you're a startup.
Not yet, but it was like an enabler to become a startup at some point, right? So, okay, now you start selling things which are actually, they have to do with technology. So you sell analytics platforms or analytics project, or you sell some custom software development for data-oriented things like data warehousing or some kind of machine learning stuff. And that was a time when all the things were booming. So everyone was talking data science, machine learning. It was a really great place to be. And of course, it required a lot of learning from me and my partner to understand what it means and how these things work, and even going a bit deeper to understand how the algorithms works to be able to hire relevant people. So that was a whole lot of the move from these, creative things to technology heavier things. But that, I think, now looking back, it created an interesting blend of expertise. Because on one hand, you understand how media work and how ads work and what do clients expect from ads to do. On the other hand, you start to understand how technology works, what's the capabilities, what algorithms can do, where algorithms can outperform people. And at some point, okay, you have this blend, you understand this side and that side. And that's where startup thinking can help you. Okay, you think, is there a place for a product here? I understand there are people on one side and they have like problems and they have needs, and I understand technology and understand what it can do. Why not to put them together and build a product?
That's interesting. You started telling the story from the side of algorithm. It's like you were learning and researching and then, only then, trying to find the client with a pain point. Usually all these smart books, they say doing vice versa makes sense, like finding a customer, finding the pain, and then only looking at the algorithm.
Yeah, I think agency or any service company is the nice way to learn both sides. Because unlike the startup, here you're paid for actual work, or you paid for actual projects, which means that you're actually also paid for learning, right? So you kind of sell a project to a bigger corporation or even to a smaller client, and you have some expertise to get that project, but you also lack some expertise. And doing the project, you learn a lot, and you are able to hire better people, and then you form a team, and then you win another project. And then, like in service business, it's easy to develop into like the inside expertise. That's what outsourcing companies do, by the way. Right? You see in Ukraine this phenomenon that there are many outsourcers, but they serve like as an incubators for startups. So many product companies, they branch out from the outsourcing companies. And that's pretty much what happened to us. So as an agency, we were an outsourcing company, right? We're selling that to corporations. We give away the IP. It's the project-based approach. Paid per project, so no expertise sort of is left inside, but it's still left. And then at some point, when you have this expertise and you understand the market and you understand the technology, you can enter a startup market not from zero, but with some kind of expertise, connections, understanding. You're building something that you think will be actually valuable and needed. And that's what we did. Our idea was pretty simple. So when we were building that for corporations, like as an outsourcing company, it was an expensive thing to do. So data science was expensive. It was like 5-6 figures projects, right? But technology was it kept democratizing. So the price for the data science, so it was going down. And at some point, we thought that it might be viable to make this product like super democratic, to build something that can help smaller companies utilize their data in a smart way as the big guys, but for a very reasonable price. Like, what if you can pay $100 and instead of hiring data scientists, have a platform that does it for you and extracts some insights from your data and helps you? That was basically the idea. And we applied the idea just to the particular type of data, so to data about advertising. And then because advertising has data by design, so imagine you're a small bookstore or whatever. You run your ads on Facebook, you run your ads on Instagram, maybe Twitter, maybe YouTube. You have a bunch of platforms involved. Every time you run ads there, you collect some data about your audience, about the performance of your creatives, about the conversion rate on your website, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of numbers and not much expertise for you to actually do something about the numbers. And then you have a plug-and-play solution which analyzes all of that and gives you insights proactively. This works, this doesn't work, optimize here, improve there, and you're going to be successful. That was like, in essence, that's what our startup did.
Yeah, thanks for explaining. Let's continue to our today's day. What are you doing today? What you're working on today?
Yeah. So that startup eventually was acquired by a public company, and it was a pretty early stage acquisition. And in these types of acquisition, it's common to stay in your acquirer for some time, right? So I stayed there for a few years, doing sort of transition, knowledge transition, business transition, all that stuff. And then by the moment when the war started, I was almost like ready for, almost done with my obligations there. And I was already open for, maybe new ventures or maybe taking a rest. I was still not sure what exactly to do. And then the war pretty much shaped the next steps, right? So when it started, I felt, as many other people, that the only important thing to focus on is to help Ukraine win this way or another. And me and my partner, my colleagues, we started to think together, how can our expertise, mostly in AI and data, how can it be helpful? And we started building like a volunteering projects. Everything was generated for free, so we never charged anyone, and all the team would work pro bono. And we started to actually give that projects to different government institutions in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Very prominent ones. I cannot give you the names, because some of the projects, they have different level of sort of some of the data is classified and have NDAs and all that stuff, but these are the prominent institutions in Ukraine, and the projects are related to the one thing is called OSINT, right? So you have open data, and you're trying to get from the data some insights and some valuable information. But more importantly, it has to do with disinformation and influence campaigns happening in Ukraine. So we have Russia on the other side of the border, which is like its hostile activities. They don't only happen on the ground, they also happen online. And that's a crucial part of this war. They're doing a lot. They're doing really hundreds of like influence operations in different places around the globe. Like they're targeting their own nation. They are also targeting Ukrainians. They're also targeting people in Europe and in States and in Africa and in LATAM. So all over the world, they have different campaigns, different messaging, different narratives being distributed. And that's a huge and powerful machine to actually manipulate people's minds and achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And the goals are different, right? In Ukraine, it's like to destabilize situation. In Russia, is to convince them that everything's okay. In America, is to stop sending us weapons, and so on and so forth. So they have many goals, and this like machine keeps working and keeps producing results. So you need to do something about it. And in Ukraine, you have many institutions and many organizations, both in government and in the civil society, that it's their full-time job to counter that, mm-hmm. and to counter that in different ways. And what we are building actually is a software that helps you counter that more effectively. And when we're talking about the counter, like let's say it's disinformation campaign, disinformation itself is an interesting topic, because even the term disinformation, so it's not the brilliant term, there are many similar things there, but let's call it, for the sake of simplicity, let's call it disinformation campaign. Mm-hmm. So when it happens, you can do something about it. First of all, you need to be able to identify that it's happening, right? That's like the very first step. So, and you need to have tools in place and data in place to be able to see, okay, it's there before it's too big. Because if you know about it when it's already on CNN, it's like, it means that you failed your job, right? You need to spot it early on. And then secondly, quite importantly, you need to assess what's the scale of this problem, how big is it, and what should be the response. Because for some problems, the best response is no response, right? Something's happening and it's a small, minor, not important thing. I don't care. I don't have time even to waste it. For some things, the response can be like huge. For example, you need your president to come out with a communication, because like that's something super, super, super important. And there are many ways to react. You might want to remove the bad content. Like let's say it's distributed on Facebook and it's fake, you want to remove that content, or you want to debunk it. That's a new term. Debunk means to actually tell the truth and distribute the truth, right? So you say they posted a picture, but the picture is actually fabricated, it's a deep fake. Here is why, here is our investigation proving that, and then you try to distribute this investigation so everyone is like convinced. And there are many other
how technical is this process of like sending these complaints, or what is the mechanism?
Yeah, not very technical, to be honest, at the very moment currently. That's something that we want to improve. Mm-hmm. So there is software involved at different steps. So for instance, for the identification, you use some software like social listening tools, right, to be able to get all the data in one place and like search it, whatever. Then the assessment is mostly manual. So you use some kind of software maybe to analyze how many likes did it get or how many publications did it generate, but then some deeper analytics, mostly manual. So you have the whole teams working to understand, is it big or not? How dangerous is it, etc. And then this response step currently is fully manual. So when we say response, it means that someone actually needs to make a decision and then implement the decision mostly manually. And that's a big problem. And that's why many good initiatives, they stop at the assessment step and they never translate into response. I think you might have heard of that problem, yeah, that everything stops at the report. So you build a beautiful report, nice diagrams, everyone sees it, and that's end of story. And that's not something we actually like, and it's not how it should be, right? So our mission, currently I'm founding the company to do exactly this. Our mission is to translate these reports or this analysis into actions, right? To make counter disinformation really, really actionable and measurable. So you counter it, and then you can understand, okay, what was the impact of my actions? How much did they narrow down the hostile activity, or how much was I effective in countering it? And
you mentioned some of such indicators or KPIs, like, for example, we saw 100 posts and then we sent these claims or strikes, or how do you call it? And out of 190 were removed, something like that.
Yeah. So that's exactly where we focus currently, this removal part. One reason why we do that is because it's very tangible, right? So that's a very tangible result. If you remove 100 out of 100, you have something to be proud of.
It's almost like getting down the missiles.
Yeah, exactly. So you can calculate this conversion rate, right? You can present it to your decision makers, to stakeholders, and that's something everyone understands. It's like the metric where you can have common ground and common sense. The problem here is that when government or authority or even a company sees this information targeting it, natural reaction, I want to remove it. When you talk to a platform, be it Facebook or TikTok or Twitter, natural reaction, we don't care because we have freedom of speech. And what it means, freedom of speech means that anyone can share any kind of lies, because if he truly believes it, it's his right? It's not illegal to post lies. Unless there are many unless, like, for example, if it can cause harm to someone, then it's not legal, right? If it can lead someone to death, it's not legal. But generally, as a rule of thumb, I can share on my Facebook whatever I want, and that's fully legal. What Facebook can do, for example, if I prove them that it's a fake information, they can reduce it, the reach of my post. So instead of 100 friends, I will reach only 10 friends, for example. But that doesn't happen instantly, and you need to prove it, and that's like a whole process itself. And the only way to actually tackle the issue is to follow the policy of the big platforms. And all of them, the good news is that all of them, they are aligned on one term. They call it coordinated inauthentic behavior, or CIB. What it means? It means that, okay, there is a post, like you, Sergei Danilenko, you posted that Putin died yesterday. You're allowed to do this, right? Even if you know it's not true, it can be a joke, whatever. So we cannot do anything about it. But if we prove that it's not only you who posted this, but there was a network of people acting in the same sort of interest, with the same intention, and the behavior that you displayed, it was inauthentic. For example, all of you posted it in the same time, and you posted it, for example, by Chinese time, but you live in Czech Republic, or I don't know, you live in Poland. So it looks very inauthentic and anomalous. If you're able to prove it, we can take down the whole content, and we can take down your accounts as well. You're most probably going to be banned.
That's another KPI, right?
Yeah, and the trick is to be able to prove this, because if you don't prove this, your actions are not relevant. They're not effective. You can file them these reports, you can do these strikes with not much of the reaction. But if you prove this CIB, so all of a sudden the reaction is there, and platforms are actually happy to collaborate because it's against their policies. They're also searching for this type of activities. And what we're building currently, like at the very moment, is the software that is able to track CIB at scale, prepare very standardized and very convincing reports, and file those reports to platforms who can take actions about
it. Do these reports get generated by lawyers, legal people?
Good question. Not lawyers, because this thing is more, luckily, it's more like standardized. So it's not that you need to have a bunch of lawyers to understand if it's CAB or not. It's more formal. So you have criteria, and you can it can be explicitly visible if it follows the criteria or not. So let's say if the person posts every single post the person posts, he posted at the very first minute of an hour. So it's like 4 p.m., not a minute later, then 6 p.m., not a minute later, and so on and so forth. It's a clear evidence that the person uses automation software to post, right? Because not any human can do it exactly like this. And then if you see that there is a group of people who are reposting each other, and you see in a graph that they're much more interconnected, then it's because you have some level of expectation what is normal here. If you see it's abnormal, it's a clear proof that you have, you're experiencing here, you're witnessing a network. And then if you can stack many proofs together, so there is a network and there is some inauthenticity, and the content they distribute, it's fake, and so on and so forth. If you have enough evidence in one place, that becomes convincing, even without lawyers.
And who can send these claims? Are there any special users who are empowered to send these claims to the platforms, or anyone can send that? Technically,
everyone. The question is who will be heard, right? So authorities, they have the special lines of communication. So platforms, they have special GovTech, GR people, government relations people, whose job is to collect this claim and build proper relationship. They also have people who are talking with corporate segments. So the bigger you are as an organization, the higher your chances are to be heard. And this is done not only by authorities, it's also done by the civil society. There are many NGOs who have this kind of line of communication with big tech, and they're also preparing these reports and investigations. And sometimes they involve, public opinion to be a part of an equation here. So let's say you file a report, no action is taken, then you make the report public, then you see that people start reacting on it, and then you have a big audience of your supporters, and then platforms cannot ignore it anymore because they see there is a lot of buzz around the topic. Sometimes that's your strategy. But most interestingly, there is a new regulation coming in play this year in Europe. It's called Digital Service Act, or DSA. And that's Europe's response to what platforms are doing. And that's a well-written document. So what's Europe's position here? They say, okay, we are Europe and we don't have any big tech that we own, right? Unfortunately. So we have Facebook and Twitter coming from overseas, from the States, and we have TikTok from China. And that means that we are pretty much dominated technology-wise by other actors, by other players, and our citizens are not protected. So foreign companies on our territory do whatever they want, and we don't regulate that. And so DSA aims to actually stop this process and introduce some regulations. And the regulation goes like this, that there is a special authority now in Europe. You can, as a citizen or as an organization, you can file a claim to this authority. Authority then enters the communication with the platform. And if platforms ignore the claim, they can be fined for as much as, if I'm not mistaken, 8% of their revenues in the country, which is like a huge amount. Yeah, so it becomes serious for the platforms, right? And what can be the claim about? It can be about disinformation, for example. It can be about fake news being distributed on the platform.
Could you please specify a little bit here? I can imagine fighting against false facts, like you can prove it's lie, it's false. What about opinions? I think that there are a lot of damaging and dangerous opinions. What is the approach here?
Yeah, so that's the tricky part. That's why they have this CAB in place, and that's why everyone's trying to come up with the policy, because the whole trick is to draw the line between freedom of speech and the hostility, right, and the danger it possesses, right? But no one wants to compromise freedom of speech at the same time, right? So as an opinion, I should be able to express any opinion, right? Platform is not in a position to decide what's right, what's wrong, and what's allowed, what's not allowed. And platforms, of course, they give away this responsibility. They say, we don't want to be in a judging position. What they do, they involve civil society over here for this task. And like all of them, like and Facebook and Google and TikTok, everyone, they work with the like sort of certified organizations, not just one, many of them. And those guys, they do things like fact checking, assessment of how critical the harm can be from a particular post, and the debunking, whatever, and they actually label content. So
but then you are in the situation where you need to carefully choose this organization. They are sort of judges, referees in this situation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What they do, so I think they have the best practices in play, like they have this cross-reference, for example, that they send the same sort of fact to few independent organizations, and the organizations are certified. There is this international network of fact checkers, and I think there is a criteria to enter. But of course, it's a difficult thing, right? Even like from a philosophical standpoint, what's true, what's not true, who should be a judge for this, and what is the line? It's really difficult.
Do you remember we had this organization in Ukraine? I think it was called the Committee for Moral and Ethics Principles, something like that.
Right.
And very often we saw very strange rulings on their behalf. So this part looks also tricky.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why it's such a complex thing. That's why it's not solved like easily, and that's why they coined 3 terms, not just one. So they have disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation for different flavors of this. And so actually, disinformation is absolutely not true. It's like the real fake, right? Then misinformation, it has to do more with these opinionated things. So it can be not true, but there was no intention behind it, right? So maybe it's just my opinion. Maybe I truly believe in what I'm saying. So it's not like that I'm paid by a Russian government to say that. And then malinformation is the most dangerous, I think, because it's even technically true, right? So you just select and cherry pick necessary facts to build the perspective that you want. And then like, we cannot claim it's not true, but it is, the outcome. So if I read this piece of content, I will start believing in things I wouldn't otherwise. So it convinces me in something, and it creates some agenda for me by using only true facts, but in a proper order, and it frames those facts in a special way, etc. So that's like the manipulated content. We could call it this way, super manipulated content. And because, first of all 3, they require a different reaction because they have different nature. But also what's important is that I think this approach of behavior is the right approach. So content itself, like you can have this argument: is it valid to delete the content or not? Does content itself possess harm? But if we're talking about a network of people and we can prove the intent, so we don't care about the content in this case, we care about the intent behind the content. And if we can prove that there was a malicious intent, if we prove that that's actually an influence operation, if we prove that there are guys from FSB who initiated it or were somehow involved, that's another story, right? Maybe even if it's true what they shared, it's still an influence operation. So we remove it down. And if it's not an influence operation, if it's just random facts, brought up by real people who believe in what they say, okay, they have the right to do that. Like we can have a discussion. We can try to convince each other in a public discussion and take it from there.
It's almost like deep philosophy stuff, because you need to use so many like definitions. For example, for me, it's quite hard to get what is influence operation, because if you're educating someone, you're influencing this person, but you influence the person for good. When you say influence operation, you mean you influence someone for harm. And here we come to good and bad and harmful and useful. And that's another whole story.
Yeah, it's hard, when it comes to ethics. It's super hard, especially in the global context, because for us, for Ukrainians these days, ethics, it became very simple. It's like black and white, right? And when we are talking about our conflict, it's simple it seems simple to answer these difficult questions. But when you put yourself into Facebook's shoes and you have conflict like you have war in Ukraine, and you understand, okay, more or less whose side you take, and you understand what's the evil in this story. But then you have something happening in Africa, and then you have something happening in Asia, and you have so many conflicts. Not all of them are wars, right? You have some corporate conflicts, you have some interpersonal conflicts, you have conflicts between the left and the right. In America, you have feminists versus Jordan Peterson, and you have so many conflicts, and in every single one, you cannot take a side, right? Because it's impossible to always understand what's right, what's wrong, and it's I doubt there is an objective measure.
Maybe I misunderstood. Is influence operation, are influence operations prohibited by Facebook policies?
Yeah. So, and that makes it a bit simpler. So no matter you do it for like sort of, you think you do it for good or not, it's very subjective. Russia always also thinks that they do it for good, maybe. We don't care. Like if you do an influence operation, you coordinate a large number of people, and you involve bots most likely, and you involve commercial organizations like agencies, and you buy accounts. So you actually establish a behavior which is not allowed. And if you do that, it should be taken down and that should be countered. As simple as that. Another question is that if you do this, and you do this for good, and no one disagrees, no one will ever report you, right? Because for you to be reported, you need to actually cause some harm, or there should be at least someone who's not happy with what you're doing. So I think that's like the protection mechanism behind it.
Yeah, that's super exciting time. Could you maybe speak a little bit about people who might want to join your team? Is it possible to reach out to you somewhere on LinkedIn, Facebook, or other channels? What sort of people you appreciate? Are these data scientists or ethic specialists or lawyers?
Yeah, totally. We almost formed the team, but we still have a couple of open positions. We're mostly technical people because what we want to build is a software solution, right? So we don't want to take on ourselves these hard decisions on ethics and everything. We'll let our users decide, and we'll let others decide, but we want to arm them with technology to be better at these decisions and faster and smarter. So we have we always are looking for data scientists with expertise in natural language processing, NLP. That's a hot topic these days because of this OpenAI initiatives, but I know there are many great guys in Ukraine doing that. We already have some of them on board, and we would love to have at least another one person for this. And another expertise is, we call it an analyst. So that can be actually a person with background in media, maybe investigative journalism, or maybe some more like classical data analytics. So this person will actually help us conduct investigations. Because we also, on top of the software, we want to conduct our own investigations and make them public, make them loud. And for that, we need this kind of a person.
Are you focused on the war in Ukraine to help Ukraine win? Or do you have other initiatives running within the scope of this disinformation projects, like other geographies or other countries? Or is this somewhere in future in the roadmap?
Yeah, so we started in Ukraine for an obvious reason. Now, as we're building a commercial company, of course, we want to operate globally. And we see that the problem, it goes far beyond just Ukraine, and it goes far beyond the war, right? So war, it highlighted the importance, like as wars they do normally, right? They show you how big the problem is. But then if you look left, you look right, you see that it's actually everywhere. It's like starting from things like COVID. COVID was actually the first great big marker to show how much vulnerable are we to this, to these risks. And then, so it's political influence operations, these are corporate wars, these are things for public good, like the vaccination versus anti-vax and all that things. So we think that the demand is there, the problem is massive, and everyone struggles to find a way to solve the problem. So everyone thinks about it, like platforms think, and they give some solutions, but solutions are imperfect. Governments think, and they introduce regulations, but the mechanism is not there yet. Now, civil society thinks about it. There are many organizations focused on this. Military guys think of this. We see that they put into their budgets specifically to counter this info. And we see that they named this info like a top 1, top 3 threat for the coming decade. So awareness is there, problems is there, solutions are not necessarily there yet. So we want to be in that space of solutions and offer something to the world to make, as we call it, like to make internet a more trustworthy place.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow, I like this part of the stream so much that honestly, I don't even want to ask other questions that I had, just to make this video and stream focus solely on what you just described. Or would you like to comment on any other things that you think relevant and I haven't asked?
Yeah, I think there is one factor in play which we can discuss, which has to do with what I've just said, but it also has to do with my other, like hobbies and everything. It has to do with the AI, right? So what we are experiencing, I think everyone now discusses this on all the podcasts and everywhere. Generative AI, like what to do. Will my job be irrelevant? ChatGPT, what to do about it? And in our context, it's also an interesting factor, right? Because if we're talking about disinformation and then we have ChatGPT in place, what it means, right? You can try to imagine the world in 2-3 years and how will these influence operations evolve, how they will evolve, assuming that you have cheap and accessible generative AI in place. And that's a big question. Like we can just speculate here, but one of the possible scenarios, right, is that influence operations are much cheaper. So it's much cheaper to produce content of a good quality at a larger scale. And we can assume that there will be more operations and that these operations will be even harder, even much more difficult to identify because they will mimic so well the behavior of people and the content that people distribute that can be a bigger of a problem. And here, again, a lot of unsolved things, like very recent news, I think just from this week, that OpenAI announced a model that is able to track content generated by ChatGPT. So they're like playing, like, they're building the tool and then they're building a tracking tool for their tool. It's interesting, they're building both. And some people are excited about this. I'm not. Because if you read go into details, you see that the accuracy of detection is only 26%. Like 26% is super low. And there are some limitations which I doubt will be ever overcome. So, okay, maybe it will not be 26%, it will be 56%, which is much better. But by design, because the texts are generated in a way to mimic human texts, and they are doing a great job, it will be hard to almost impossible to distinguish between the two in this natural way. There are some ideas. So, for example, one of the possible solutions would be to put watermarks. Like, you put watermark on the image, so you can potentially put a watermark in text. You can ask how would you put a watermark in text, right? It's not a word that you put there on purpose. It's more like when the model generates texts, there is some distribution of words being used there, and this distribution is slightly adjusted.
Okay, I created a post for Facebook, and this watermark saying that this post 50% probability guaranteed by AI. I'm not a robot, but they say it's only 50% chance.
Yeah, that's pretty likely. So what happened is that they say Macbeth by Shakespeare is AI generated. So that was the output of their model. So yeah, it's imperfect, and I doubt how it ever can be perfect. So again, something we're thinking of, that if it's impossible to identify a single piece of content and say, is it AI generated or not, what can you do? You can maybe try again to work with networks, right? And you can look broader beyond just one piece of content. And you can say that, okay, any single person can post whatever he wants, including AI generated content, not a big deal. But if you see, again, this coordinated activity, and you will see hundreds of thousands of accounts posting content generated from the same prompt, posting rewrites of the same sort of message.
Oh, cool. So it's not about the content itself, it's about the sources to push this content, right?
Yeah, it's about distribution, right? And I think it's not that you can take one piece and make a decision. It's more like you look at the whole info space at the very moment, right? And if you see there is a spike of activity in the info space, then the content attributed to this spike is your problem, right? It's something you want to tackle.
I think your startup was built around spikes, like
the previous one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were doing the anomaly detection, so it's kind of familiar to us. And yeah, in a way, it's similar field, a similar technology, but very different application.
Yeah, much more global scale.
Yeah, much more global scale. And this time, I truly believe that the problem we are trying to solve this time is like much more real problem, and the problem drives me much more. So in advertising, you can build whatever. It can be smart, it can generate a lot of revenue. But when you ask yourself, why am I building this, right? What's the public good? What's my vision? You have hard times to answer that questions. And here, especially given the factor of Ukrainian war, it's very simple to answer you. So it has this like instant effect because it helps our authorities be more effective, and so it helps also like our guys to do their job better. And then globally, it helps generally protect the society and protect the public good, because we see that societies are easy to hack, right? And that happens. That happens with vaccination. That happens with Brexit. That happens with elections in many cases, and it happens at the times of wars. And that happened in Russia. If you think what happened in Russia and why we have this war, partially because the whole nation was hacked by media for 20 years. And
like
it was
a virus.
Yeah. And so if you can have the cure for this hacking, right, like an antivirus that prevents hacking from happening, that makes the world generally a more sustainable place, right?
Yeah. We can test the idea that you just described on me. So you said making internet a more trustworthy place.
Yeah, that's a new like tagline that I'm testing. Does it resonate with people?
I remembered.
Oh,
I remembered.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, because it should be short, right, and it should reflect the idea. So maybe this, but as any early stage company, we iterate a lot. Maybe in 2 weeks, I'll come to you with another tagline. Yeah, but I think it will be along these lines, because the whole idea is something like this.
Wow, thank you so much for your time. I didn't expect, honestly, that much stream of new information, which was super new for me, although I'm following a lot of such news. Thanks for agreeing to talk and to share these. And everyone who is watching this video recording or the live stream, please join Dmytro, find him on LinkedIn or other social networks. He described sort of people he would appreciate in the team. And definitely, let's make internet a more trustworthy place.
Yeah, sir, thanks for inviting me. It was a great conversation. And I'll follow your podcasts and watch other episodes.
Thanks. I appreciate it a lot. Bye. Take care.
Bye for now.